It was a quiet evening in the city, the kind where the hum of distant traffic blends with the soft rustle of leaves. Maria Thompson, a 34-year-old single mother of two, was walking home after finishing her second job for the day. Her feet ached from standing all evening at the diner where she worked as a waitress, but her mind was focused on getting back to her kids. She lived in a neighborhood that had seen better days, cracked sidewalks, faded streetlights, and buildings that looked like they'd been forgotten by time. But it was home, and Maria loved it because it was close to her children's school and her workplace. The streets were mostly empty, save for the occasional car driving by or a stray cat darting into an alley. Maria pulled her coat tighter around herself as a cool breeze swept through the area. She wasn't particularly worried about being out late. She knew her neighbors, and she had walked this route countless times before. Still, there was always a small voice in the back of her mind reminding her to stay alert. Living in this part of town meant you never quite let your guard down. As she turned the corner onto a dimly lit street, two figures stepped out of the shadows. At first, Maria thought they might be teenagers hanging out, but then she noticed their uniforms. Two police officers stood in front of her, their badges glinting faintly under the flickering light of a nearby lamppost. One of them was tall and broad-shouldered, while the other was shorter but carried himself with a cocky confidence. They introduced themselves as Officers Davis and Marks, explaining that they were patrolling the area due to reports of recent thefts. Maria nodded politely, though a knot of unease began to form in her stomach. She'd heard stories about people in her neighborhood being stopped by the police for no reason, and now she wondered if she was about to become one of those stories. "Evening, ma'am," Officer Davis said, his tone casual but firm. "We're just checking in with folks who are out late. Can we ask you a few questions?" Maria hesitated for a moment, but then nodded again. "Sure," she replied, keeping her voice steady. She figured it was best to cooperate and get it over with. The officers asked her where she was coming from, where she was headed, and whether she'd seen anything suspicious lately. Maria answered truthfully, explaining that she worked at the diner down the block and was heading home to her kids. Officer Marks scribbled something in his notepad, nodding along as if he were taking her seriously. But Officer Davis seemed distracted, his eyes wandering over her appearance in a way that made Maria uncomfortable. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clutching her purse a little tighter. Something about the situation felt off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Then, without warning, Officer Davis did something that would change everything. With a smirk, he reached out and lifted the hem of Maria's skirt, letting out a loud laugh as he did so. "Oops, sorry," he said. Clearly not sorry at all. His partner, Officer Marks, burst into laughter too, slapping him on the shoulder as if they were sharing some private joke. Maria froze, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. For a split second, she thought about yelling or pushing him away, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew how dangerous it could be to confront someone with a badge, especially when they already held all the power. Instead, she took a deep breath and stepped back, pulling her skirt down firmly. "That wasn't funny," she said, her voice trembling slightly but still strong enough to make her point. The officers didn't seem fazed. If anything, their smirks grew wider. "Relax, ma'am," Officer Davis said, waving a hand dismissively. It was just a joke. But Maria wasn't laughing. Inside, she felt a storm brewing, a mix of humiliation, frustration, and disbelief that these men who were supposed to protect her had treated her with such disrespect. She stared at them for a moment longer, her dark eyes blazing with intensity. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. As she moved further down the street, Maria's mind raced. She thought about her kids waiting for her at home, about how hard she worked every day to give them a better life. And she thought about how moments like this reminded her that the world wasn't always fair, especially for women like her. Black. Women who often bore the brunt of society's cruelty. But even as tears threatened to spill from her eyes, Maria refused to let them fall. She squared her shoulders and kept walking, already plotting her next move. These officers might think they were untouchable, but Maria was determined to prove them wrong. Maria's steps echoed softly against the cracked pavement as she walked away from the officers, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The laughter of the two men still rang in her ears, mocking and cruel, but she refused to let it break her. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, not because of physical exhaustion, but because of the weight of what had just happened. Her skirt, now firmly pulled down, seemed to cling to her legs as if it, too, carried the shame of the moment. But deep inside, Maria knew this wasn't about her. It was about something much bigger. She thought about her children, her son, Marcus, who was 9 years old and loved basketball, and her daughter, Jasmine, who was 6 and dreamed of becoming a teacher one day. They were waiting for her at home, probably sitting on the couch watching cartoons or finishing up their homework. She imagined their faces lighting up when she walked through the door, tired but smiling, ready to tuck them into bed. How could she explain to them that someone had treated their mother like she didn't matter? That people whose job was to protect her had laughed at her pain? The thought made her stop in her tracks. For a moment she stood there under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, her breath visible in the cool night air. Maria clenched her fists, feeling the sharp edges of her nails digging into her palms. Anger bubbled within her, hot and unrelenting. It wasn't just anger at the officers. It was anger at a system that allowed such things to happen. Anger at a world that often dismissed women like her. Anger at herself for even hesitating before speaking up back there. But then, almost as quickly as the anger surged, it transformed into something else, determination. Maria straightened her posture, lifting her chin slightly as if daring anyone or anything to stand in her way. She realized that walking away wasn't enough. Ignoring the incident wouldn't make it go away. If anything, staying silent would only give those officers more power over her life. And Maria Thompson was done letting others control her story. Her mind raced with possibilities. What could she do? Who could she tell? She needed evidence, something concrete to prove what had happened. Suddenly, she remembered the small camera, clipped to her purse. It was a gift from Marcus last Christmas, one of those tiny devices that looked like a keychain but doubled as a recorder. He'd been so proud when he gave it to her, saying, "Mom, you can use this to keep yourself safe." At the time, Maria had smiled and thanked him, thinking it was just a sweet gesture from a boy who cared deeply for his mother. Now she wondered if her son somehow knew she'd need it someday. Maria stopped again, leaning against a nearby wall, as she rummaged through her bag. Her hands trembled slightly as she found the device and turned it over in her fingers. It was lightweight, almost insignificant, yet it held the potential to change everything. She pressed the button to check its memory, praying silently that it had recorded something useful. To her relief, the light blinked green, indicating that the device was operational. Though she hadn't activated the video feature during the encounter, she recalled hearing the faint click of the microphone turning on earlier that evening. Maybe, just maybe, it had captured the audio of the officer's cruel laughter and taunting remarks. With renewed hope, Maria slipped the camera back into her purse and continued walking. As she moved, her thoughts drifted to the people she trusted most. There was Lisa, her best friend since childhood, who always knew exactly what to say to lift her spirits. Then there was Pastor James from the local church, a kind man who often reminded his congregation that justice belonged to God, but required human effort to be fulfilled. And of course there were her co-workers at the diner, many of whom had shared similar experiences of mistreatment by authority figures. Maria knew she couldn't face this alone. She needed allies, people who would stand beside her and help her navigate the road ahead. When she finally reached her apartment building, Maria climbed the stairs slowly, each step giving her more time to process what had happened. By the time she unlocked her door and stepped inside, her resolve had solidified. She greeted Marcus and Jasmine with a forced smile, hugging them tightly and kissing their foreheads before sending them off to bed. Once they were settled, she sat at the kitchen table, pulling out her phone and dialing Lisa's number. "Hey, girl," Lisa answered after a few rings, her voice warm and familiar. "What's up?" Maria hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. But once she started talking, the words spilled out in a rush. She told Lisa about the officers stopping her, questioning her, and eventually humiliating her. She described the look on their faces, the smugness, the arrogance, as if they believed they were untouchable. And she explained her plan to fight back, using the camera footage as proof of their misconduct. Lisa listened quietly, her usual playful demeanor replaced by seriousness. When Maria finished speaking, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Lisa spoke. "You're not doing this alone, okay?" she said firmly. "We'll figure it out together. You've got me, and we'll get everyone else on board too." Those words meant the world to Maria. Knowing that she had support gave her strength, but it also reminded her of the importance of what she was about to do. This wasn't just about her, it was about every woman, every person of color, every individual who had ever been made to feel powerless by those in authority. Maria wanted to send a message loud and clear: enough was enough. Over the next hour, Maria and Lisa brainstormed ideas. They talked about reaching out to local news outlets, filing a formal complaint with the police department, and even organizing a community meeting to discuss accountability and reform. Lisa suggested documenting every detail of the incident, writing down everything Maria remembered, no matter how small or insignificant it seemed. "The more information we have, the stronger our case will be," Lisa said confidently. By the time they ended the call, Maria felt a strange sense of calm washing over her. The fear and humiliation she had felt earlier were still there, lurking in the corners of her mind, but they no longer controlled her. Instead, she felt empowered, as if she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her dignity. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was late and she needed sleep, but her mind was buzzing with plans and possibilities. Before heading to bed, Maria opened her laptop and began typing out a timeline of events. She included the date, time, location, and descriptions of both officers, noting every word they had said to her. She attached the audio file from the camera to an email draft, planning to send it to herself as a backup. As she worked, she thought about the challenges ahead. Filing a complaint against police officers wouldn't be easy. She knew that. People like her were often dismissed, ignored, or even retaliated against for speaking out. But Maria also knew that staying silent would only perpetuate the cycle of injustice. As she finally crawled into bed, exhausted but resolute, Maria whispered a quiet prayer. She prayed for courage, for wisdom, and for the strength to keep going even when the odds felt insurmountable. She thought about her children again, sleeping peacefully in the next room, and vowed to create a better future for them, a future where they wouldn't have to endure the same struggles she faced. And as sleep finally claimed her, Maria dreamed, not of fear or defeat, but of victory. In her dream, she stood tall, surrounded by a crowd of supporters cheering her name. The officers who had laughed at her were nowhere to be seen, their badges tarnished and forgotten. Maria smiled in her sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring another step closer to making that dream a reality. The next morning, Maria woke up with a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in years. The sunlight streaming through her bedroom window seemed brighter than usual, as if it were urging her to take action. She stretched and sat up in bed, her mind already racing with plans. Today wasn't just another day, it was the beginning of something bigger. Her children were still asleep, their soft snores filling the quiet apartment. For now, they didn't need to know what had happened or the battle their mother was about to fight. All Maria wanted was for them to grow up in a world where no one would dare treat them the way those officers had treated her. After getting dressed, Maria brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open. Last night's brainstorming session with Lisa had given her clarity, and now it was time to put those ideas into motion. First, she listened carefully to the audio recording from the camera clipped to her purse. The sound quality wasn't perfect. The faint hum of traffic in the background occasionally drowned out voices. But the officers' laughter was unmistakable. Their mocking tone cut through the static like a knife, sending chills down Maria's spine. There were also snippets of their conversation. "Relax, ma'am. Officer Davis said dismissively, followed by more chuckles from both men. It was enough to make Maria's blood boil all over again, but she forced herself to stay focused. This wasn't just evidence. It was proof that justice needed to be served. With the audio file secured, Maria began drafting an email to herself, attaching the recording along with detailed notes about the incident. She included everything she could remember: the time, location, descriptions of the officers, and even the color of their patrol car parked nearby. Every detail mattered because every detail could strengthen her case. As she typed, Maria realized how meticulous she had become overnight. Before this, she had never thought of herself as someone who paid attention to such specifics, but now she understood why it was crucial. If she wanted people to believe her story, she had to present it clearly and convincingly. Once the email was sent, Maria decided to reach out to Pastor James. He was a pillar of strength in the community, always ready to lend an ear or offer guidance when someone was struggling. She dialed his number, her fingers trembling slightly as she waited for him to pick up. When he answered, his deep, calming voice immediately put her at ease. "Good morning, Maria," he said warmly. "How can I help you today?" Maria took a deep breath before launching into her story. She explained what had happened the previous night, describing how the officers had stopped her, questioned her, and ultimately humiliated her. She told him about the audio recording and her plans to file a formal complaint with the police department. To her relief, Pastor James didn't interrupt or try to downplay her experience. Instead, he listened intently, offering words of encouragement when she finished. "Maria, you're doing the right thing," he said firmly. "Standing up against injustice isn't easy, but it's necessary. And you won't be alone. You have your community behind you." Those words gave Maria a renewed sense of confidence. After hanging up, she called Lisa to update her on the progress. Together, they discussed the next steps, including contacting a lawyer who specialized in civil rights cases. Lisa suggested reaching out to Mr. Harris, a well-known attorney in the area who had handled similar cases in the past. "He's tough but fair," Lisa assured her. "If anyone can help you, it's him." Armed with Lisa's recommendation, Maria looked up Mr. Harris's contact information online. His website featured testimonials from clients whose lives he had changed through his dedication to justice. One testimonial stood out to Maria. A woman who had been wrongfully arrested described how Mr. Harris had fought tirelessly to clear her name. Inspired, Maria picked up the phone and dialed his office. After a brief conversation with his assistant, she scheduled an appointment for later that afternoon. In the meantime, Maria knew she couldn't sit idly by. She decided to visit her co-workers at the diner during their lunch break to share her story. While she trusted them, she also understood that not everyone would react the same way. Some might hesitate to speak out, fearing retaliation or simply wanting to avoid trouble. But Maria believed that collective voices carried more weight than silence ever could. When she arrived at the diner, several of her co-workers greeted her warmly, asking how her evening shift had gone. Maria hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to broach the subject, but then she dove right in. "I need to tell you all something," she began, pulling up a chair at one of the empty tables. Her co-workers gathered around, sensing the seriousness in her tone. Slowly, Maria recounted the events of the previous night, holding back tears as she described the officers' actions. She showed them the audio clip on her phone, letting them hear the laughter and mocking remarks for themselves. The room fell silent, the only sound being the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen. One of her co-workers, a middle-aged woman named Carla, spoke first. "That's disgusting," she said, shaking her head. "You shouldn't have to go through that." Others nodded in agreement, murmuring words of support. A younger waitress, Tasha, chimed in, saying, "We should do something about this. You can't let them get away with it." Encouraged by their response, Maria explained her plan to file a formal complaint and potentially take legal action. She emphasized the importance of gathering witnesses and evidence to support her case. Several of her co-workers volunteered to write statements detailing incidents they had witnessed or experienced involving police misconduct. Though none of them had endured exactly what Maria had, their stories painted a broader picture of systemic issues within law enforcement in their neighborhood. By the end of the meeting, Maria felt a surge of gratitude toward her coworkers. They weren't just colleagues, they were family, willing to stand by her side when she needed them most. With their help, she felt more prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Later that afternoon, Maria met with Mr. Harris at his office. The lawyer's presence was commanding yet approachable, his sharp eyes scanning the documents she brought with her. After listening attentively to her account of the incident, he reviewed the audio recording and nodded thoughtfully. "This is strong evidence," he said, leaning back in his chair. "It's clear these officers crossed a line, and we can build a solid case around it." Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to believe that justice might actually be within reach. Mr. Harris outlined the process of filing a formal complaint with the police department and pursuing legal action if necessary. He warned her that it wouldn't be easy. There would likely be resistance, skepticism, and attempts to discredit her. But he promised to fight alongside her every step of the way. As Maria left the office, she felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Fear still lingered in the corners of her mind, but it was overshadowed by determination. She thought about the people who had already rallied behind her: Lisa, Pastor James, her co-workers, and now Mr. Harris, and realized she wasn't fighting this battle alone. Each person added strength to her cause, turning what could have been a lonely struggle into a collective movement for change. That evening, as Maria tucked her children into bed, she kissed their foreheads and whispered, "Mommy's working hard to make things better for us." Though they didn't fully understand what she meant, they smiled sleepily and hugged her tightly. In that moment, Maria knew she was doing the right thing, not just for herself, but for them and for everyone else who deserved to live without fear of mistreatment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready. The next morning, Maria woke up with a sense of anticipation mixed with anxiety. She had spent the previous night going over everything in her mind: the incident, the audio recording, the support she'd received from her friends and co-workers, and the promise of legal action. But now, as she prepared to file a formal complaint with the police department, reality began to sink in. This wasn't just about gathering evidence or talking to people who believed in her. It was about stepping into a system that often worked against people like her. Still, Maria was determined not to let fear hold her back. After dropping her kids off at school, Maria headed straight to the police station. The building loomed large and imposing, its brick facade cold and unwelcoming. She hesitated for a moment, outside the entrance, staring up at the sign above the door that read, "Protect and Serve." The words felt hollow to her now, almost mocking. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped inside. The lobby was bustling with activity, uniformed officers walking briskly past, civilians waiting impatiently on benches, and clerks typing away behind bulletproof glass windows. Maria approached the front desk, clutching the folder containing her notes and the audio recording. Her heart pounded as she explained why she was there. "I'd like to file a complaint," she said firmly, meeting the clerk's eyes without flinching. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, nodded slowly. "Take a seat," she instructed, handing Maria a clipboard with a form attached. "Fill this out, and we'll process it." Maria sat down on one of the hard plastic chairs lining the wall, her hands trembling slightly as she began filling out the form. Each question seemed designed to make her doubt herself. What exactly happened? Why do you believe misconduct occurred? Do you have any witnesses? She answered as thoroughly as possible, attaching copies of her notes and the audio file. When she handed the completed form back to the clerk, she felt a small sense of accomplishment. This was the first official step toward holding those officers accountable. But the resistance started almost immediately. A few days later, Maria received a call from Internal Affairs, the division responsible for investigating complaints against police officers. The investigator, a man named Mr. Collins, sounded polite enough during their initial conversation, but his tone quickly shifted when Maria described the incident. He asked probing questions, some of which felt accusatory rather than curious. "Are you sure this is what happened?" he asked skeptically. "Did you provoke them in any way?" Maria clenched her jaw, forcing herself to remain calm. "No, sir," she replied evenly. "I was simply walking home when they stopped me and treated me with disrespect. I have evidence to support my claim." Mr. Collins paused before responding. "We'll review your case, ma'am, but I should warn you, these things can take time. And without more substantial proof—" His voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. Maria hung up the phone feeling frustrated but unsurprised. She had expected pushback, but hearing it directly still stung. It was as if they were already trying to dismiss her story, brushing it aside as if it didn't matter. Determined not to let them win, she called Mr. Harris, her attorney, to update him on the situation. "They're testing you," Mr. Harris said after listening intently. "They want to see if you'll give up or get discouraged. Don't let them. Keep pushing forward." With Mr. Harris's advice in mind, Maria decided to escalate her efforts. She reached out to Lisa again, asking if she could help spread awareness within the community. Together, they organized a small meeting at the local church, inviting neighbors, friends, and even strangers who might be interested in supporting Maria's cause. Pastor James graciously offered to host the event, opening the doors of the church to anyone willing to listen. On the evening of the meeting, Maria arrived early to set up chairs and prepare her presentation. As people trickled in, she greeted each one warmly, introducing herself and thanking them for coming. By the time the room was full, there were nearly 30 people seated, all eager to hear what Maria had to say. Standing at the front of the room, she took a deep breath and began sharing her story. "I'm here today because something happened to me that shouldn't happen to anyone," she started, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. She recounted the events of that fateful night, describing how the officers had humiliated her and laughed as if it were a joke. She played the audio clip, letting the laughter echo through the quiet sanctuary. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by murmurs of disbelief and outrage. One woman stood up, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't right," she said passionately. "We can't let them treat us like this." Others chimed in, sharing their own experiences of mistreatment by law enforcement. An elderly man spoke about being stopped multiple times while driving, always under the guise of routine checks. A young mother talked about being frisked in front of her children during a traffic stop. Each story added weight to Maria's cause, highlighting the broader issue of systemic injustice. By the end of the meeting, the group had formed a loose coalition dedicated to supporting Maria and addressing police misconduct in their neighborhood. They agreed to attend city council meetings, write letters to local representatives, and organize peaceful protests if necessary. Pastor James promised to use his pulpit to raise awareness, while Lisa volunteered to create flyers and social media posts to amplify their message. As the meeting wrapped up, Maria felt a renewed sense of hope. For so long, she had carried the burden of this fight alone, but now she had an entire community standing beside her. Still, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. News of her complaint had already begun to circulate, and not everyone was supportive. Some neighbors whispered behind her back, accusing her of causing trouble and stirring up unnecessary drama. Others warned her to drop the case, claiming it would only bring more problems for her and her family. Even her own children noticed the tension. One evening, as Maria tucked Marcus into bed, he looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mommy, why are people mad at you?" he asked innocently. Maria's heart broke at the question. How could she explain to her son that standing up for yourself sometimes meant facing criticism from those who preferred to stay silent? Instead, she smiled softly and kissed his forehead. "Sometimes doing the right thing makes people uncomfortable," she said gently, "but that doesn't mean we should stop." Despite the backlash, Maria refused to back down. With the support of her newfound allies, she continued to push forward, attending meetings, gathering signatures for petitions, and speaking out whenever she had the chance. Every step felt like a victory, no matter how small, because it brought her closer to the justice she deserved. One afternoon, While visiting the diner where she worked, Maria overheard two customers discussing her case. One of them, a burly man in a baseball cap, shook his head disapprovingly. "She should have kept quiet," he muttered. "You don't mess with cops." Maria froze, gripping the tray of drinks she was carrying. Part of her wanted to lash out, to confront the man and tell him exactly why staying quiet wasn't an option. But instead, she took a deep breath and walked over to their table, setting the tray down with a soft clink. "Excuse me," she said politely, catching their attention. "I couldn't help but overhear. If you don't mind, I'd like to share my perspective." The men exchanged glances, surprised by her boldness. Reluctantly, they nodded, allowing her to speak. Maria proceeded to explain her side of the story, emphasizing the importance of accountability and respect. By the time she finished, the burly man's expression had softened. "I didn't know all that," he admitted gruffly. "Maybe you're right. It wasn't a grand victory, but it was progress." Maria realized that changing minds wouldn't happen overnight. It required patience, persistence, and courage, and with each person she reached, she felt the walls of resistance crumbling bit by bit. As weeks turned into months, Maria's determination never wavered. She faced obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but she also found strength in the growing number of people who rallied around her. What had started as a personal fight for justice had transformed into a movement, a testament to the power of unity and resilience. And though the battle was far from over, Maria knew she was on the right path. Maria's story was about to take a turn she hadn't fully anticipated. The growing support from her community had given her strength, but it also meant that her fight was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who believed in justice and accountability. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table reviewing the latest updates with Lisa, an idea struck her. "What if we shared my story online?" Maria asked suddenly. "If more people knew what happened, maybe they'd join us." Lisa raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You mean like social media?" "That could work," she said thoughtfully. "But are you ready for that kind of attention?" Maria hesitated for a moment. She had always been private, preferring to keep her struggles behind closed doors. But this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sending a message loud enough to reach those in power. "I think I have to be," she replied firmly. "If it helps bring change, then yes, I'm ready." That night, Maria sat down at her laptop and began drafting a post. She wrote honestly and openly, detailing the incident with the officers and how it made her feel. She included screenshots of her notes, transcripts of the audio recording, and even photos of the bruises on her arms where the officers had grabbed her too roughly. Before hitting publish, she reread the post several times, making sure every word conveyed both her pain and her determination. Finally, with a deep breath, she clicked post and braced herself for whatever came next. Within hours, her story exploded across social media. Friends shared her post. Strangers commented words of encouragement, and local activists tagged prominent figures in the community, urging them to amplify her voice. By morning, Maria woke up to hundreds of notifications, likes, shares, comments, and messages flooding her inbox. People from all over the country were talking about her case, calling for accountability and reform. The hashtag Dire Justice for Maria began trending, accompanied by stories from others who had faced similar treatment at the hands of law enforcement. As the days passed, news outlets picked up the story. Reporters called Maria incessantly, asking for interviews and offering platforms to share her experience. At first, she was hesitant, unsure of whether stepping into the spotlight was the right move. But after consulting with Mr. Harris, her attorney, she decided to embrace the opportunity. If sharing her story publicly could spark meaningful conversations about police misconduct, then it was worth it. Her first television interview aired on a local news channel. Dressed in a simple yet elegant blouse, Maria sat calmly in front of the camera, her posture confident despite the nerves bubbling inside her. The anchor introduced her briefly before turning the floor over to her. Maria spoke clearly and passionately, recounting the events of that fateful night and explaining why she felt compelled to speak out. When the interviewer asked her what she hoped to achieve, Maria didn't hesitate. "I want justice, not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been treated unfairly because of their race or gender," she said. "No one should have to live in fear of those who are supposed to protect them." The response was overwhelming. Viewers praised Maria's courage, calling her a hero for standing up against injustice. Her interview clip went viral, shared thousands of times on social media, and featured on national news programs. Celebrities joined the conversation, using their platforms to raise awareness and demand action. One well-known actress tweeted, "Maria Thompson is a warrior. We see you, we hear you, and we stand with you." Another musician dedicated a song to her during a live performance, bringing tears to Maria's eyes when she watched the video later. But not everyone supported her. As her story gained traction, so did the backlash. Critics accused her of exaggerating the incident, claiming she was seeking fame or financial gain. Some even suggested she deserved what happened, arguing that she must have done something to provoke the officers. These comments stung, cutting deeper than any insult she had faced before. For a brief moment, Maria wondered if speaking out had been a mistake. Was it worth enduring this kind of hate? Her doubts were short-lived. Every negative comment was drowned out by waves of positivity and solidarity. Supporters flooded her social media accounts with messages of love and encouragement. Strangers sent care packages to her home, gift cards, handwritten letters, and even toys for her children. Local businesses offered free meals and services, vowing to stand by her side throughout the process. Even Pastor James held a special service at the church, dedicating prayers to Maria and her family. The movement spilled into the streets. Inspired by Maria's bravery, residents organized peaceful protests outside the police station. Hundreds of people gathered, holding signs that read, "Accountability now" and "Enough is enough." Some marched silently, while others chanted slogans demanding justice. Maria attended one of the rallies, standing alongside her neighbors and friends as they called for systemic change. Looking out at the sea of faces, she felt a surge of gratitude and pride. She had started this journey alone, but now she was part of something much bigger. The protests drew significant attention, prompting city officials to address the issue publicly. During a press conference, the police chief expressed regret over the incident and promised a thorough investigation. While some viewed his statement as a step in the right direction, others remained skeptical. Maria herself listened carefully, noting the careful phrasing of his words. "We will ensure transparency and fairness in our review," he said, avoiding any direct acknowledgement of wrongdoing. To Maria, it sounded like damage control rather than genuine accountability. Still, the pressure mounted. Emails and phone calls poured into the police department, demanding answers and consequences. Local politicians weighed in, calling for reforms and independent oversight committees to monitor police conduct. Even schools began incorporating discussions about racial bias and systemic inequality into their curriculums, inspired by Maria's story. Teachers invited her to speak to students, hoping to inspire the next generation to fight for justice. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, Maria found moments of quiet reflection. Late one night, as she scrolled through her phone, she came across a comment from a young woman who had seen her interview. "Thank you for speaking up," the woman wrote. "Your courage gives me hope that things can change." Maria stared at the screen, tears welling up in her eyes. This was why she had chosen to go public, to remind others that they weren't alone, that their voices mattered, and that together they could create change. Her children noticed the shift in their mother's demeanor. Marcus and Jasmine saw her smiling more often, laughing with Lisa and Pastor James during meetings and spending quality time with them at home. They didn't fully understand everything happening around them, but they sensed that their mom was doing something important. One evening, as Maria tucked them into bed, Jasmine hugged her tightly. "Mommy, are you happy?" she asked softly. Maria paused, thinking about the question. Happy wasn't quite the right word. She still carried the weight of what had happened, and the fight was far from over. But she felt something else. Purpose. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied, kissing Jasmine's forehead. "I'm doing something that makes me proud, and I hope it makes you proud too." As the weeks turned into months, Maria continued to navigate the complexities of her newfound role as an advocate. She gave more interviews, attended rallies, and collaborated with organizations focused on criminal justice reform. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to make a difference. What had started as a deeply personal struggle had transformed into a movement that transcended borders and backgrounds, uniting people under a common goal: justice for all. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Maria faced it with unwavering resolve. She knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight, but she also knew that every voice added to the chorus brought them closer to a brighter future. And for Maria, that was worth fighting for.